James Comey, welcome to 7:30.
Great to be with you.
You loved being a prosecutor, working big crime cases, including mob cases in New York. How much did you enjoy recreating that world for your book?
I loved it, in part because it was nostalgia for me, in part because I got to do it, bring it into the present through imagining my protagonist, Nora Carlton, who was inspired by my oldest daughter in the main. So it became a labor of love mixed with some nostalgia from my career.
How did your daughter feel about you making her a character?
I think it made her cringe a little bit. I explained to her that the character Nora is really a compilation of all four of my daughters. That way, if any of them are unhappy, I can say that part is the other girl. But I think it made her cringe. And then she read it twice and felt good about it. Thought it told a real story that would take people inside these places that she loves as much as I did.
There's another starring role, the old school investigator, Benny Dugan. Who was the original Benny Dugan?
Benny Dugan is based on my beloved friend Kenny McCabe, who died in 2006. Kenny was the greatest organized crime investigator this country ever had. He was 6'5", 250 pounds, of Brooklyn with a baritone voice and a thick accent. And he was beloved by law enforcement and feared and respected by the mob.
When you say that, respected by the mob, explain that, because he was trying to shut them down.
The mobsters in the 5 New York Cosa Nostra families, they tended to tell themselves that they were noble warriors in a battle against other noble warriors. And so they saw and talked about Kenny that way. And he fostered it in some small ways. He would try not to serve them a subpoena or arrest them in front of their families. He would give them an opportunity to preserve some face. And they paid that back by asking to see him when they wanted to become a government witness, asking to be arrested by him, as strange as that sounds. There was a respect.
You've, in the past, you've described the moment where you recognized Donald Trump as behaving like a mob boss. Can you recap what that moment of recognition was?
Yeah, I can remember the moment it first popped in my head. President Obama sent us, the leaders of the CIA, the NSA, and the whole intelligence community leader, to New York to meet with the president-elect Donald Trump the first week of January of 2017 to tell him what we had found out about the Russian effort to interfere in our election and, frankly, to elect him. And so it was going to be a difficult meeting to begin with. But I didn't have a big speaking part, so I got a chance to observe. And as I watched him interact with his underlings, the way in which they were obsequious in the extreme to him, sucking up to him, constantly looking at the boss for permission to speak, the entire atmosphere seemed centered on the boss. I had this image pop in my head of Cosa Nostra. It reminded me of a mob boss, and it seemed too dramatic, and so I pushed it away, told myself I was being dramatic. And then the more I interacted with him, the more I came to see the similarities.
We now have the latest indictment against him in the documents case. You've described that as a speaking indictment. What does that mean?
A speaking indictment is where the grand jury lays out extensive commentary about the case, tells the reader the story of the case. A lot of indictments in America can be very bare bones, very spare, just reciting the legal language necessary to sustain a charge. This goes well beyond that. And if you read this indictment, you know what the evidence will be at Donald Trump's trial. There are transcripts, there are pictures. You can see it as if you're on the jury, and it paints a devastating picture of the case against him.
Can you see a case in the indictment for Donald Trump's conviction and even jail time?
Yes. It's a very strong case on the face of it, and these charges, if conviction follows, which I expect it will, carry recommended jail terms. People go to jail for 2, 3, 4, 5 years for this conduct. And so if you put in a book proposal for your next crime thriller that you were going to have a President of the United States candidate who might be going to jail while running for office, your editor would send it back. But that's the reality in which we're finding ourselves.
You often talk about being optimistic. How can you remain optimistic in the face of what you just said?
Because I know America in 2 respects. I know our history. I know just how screwed up we've been so many times in the past. There's so many periods, including in my lifetime, when we were convinced the country was coming apart. The 1960s comes to mind when I was a little boy, and we didn't come apart. I also have seen the rule of law operate in the last 2 years, especially in the wake of a hurricane of lies after the 2020 election. Our court system, whether the judge was a Republican or a Democrat, stood up and said, bring me your evidence, and heaven help you if you lie. And Donald Trump's lies were 0 and 60 in those court contests. The American people often don't see this. That's a vindication of the rule of law, of our culture. And then I'll throw in one other thing. I'm also optimistic because I see what young people have done. I worried they would withdraw from the ugliness of public life. They've done the opposite. They're right to say, yeah, you all have screwed it up, you grown-ups, and we're going to fix it. They've stepped forward by the millions to fix it. Donald Trump has not expanded the pool of his supporters in the last 4 years. He shrunk it dramatically. He's not going to be elected president of the United States again. But in the long run, I'm optimistic about this country. Australians know America. We are messed up, confusing, and kind of wonderful, and we'll be okay.
Yes, but nobody thought he was going to be elected in 2016, and he was. So Trump is an extremely vengeful person. How dangerous could a vengeful president be?
Very. Because he's not a smart man, but he would be smarter if he were returned to office. And it's a strange thing to say, but he'd be reaching deeper and deeper into the barrel. The people who would staff his administration would be the very bottom of the barrel. So people without any moral compass would surround him. And that combination is dangerous. He would know more about how our system works and be bent on trying to use it for terrible ends. We would survive that, but it would do grievous damage, which is why it's so important for the American people to engage.
Let's come back to you as an author. What's next for Jim Comey, the writer?
I've already finished the second book. It's about to go to the publisher for their reaction, but it involves Nora Carlton, again, a crime thriller that's in a different venue because I worked for 3 years at the world's largest hedge fund. I'd like to take readers in a fictionalized way into that interesting, sometimes really weird environment and tell a story that involves Nora and that is really interesting and fun for readers.
James Comey, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Great to be with you, Sarah. Thank you.